It's one of those things where the both sides shtick ultimately harms the majority, which, again, if you look at the polls, leans towards liberal progressive values, right? I remember when, and this is where, the two things you mentioned where the double standards are so apparent, where Danielle and I, just like you, hand on our heart, God knows our intentions. We try to be accurate. You can disagree with us. But, I try. Like, if I get something wrong, I'll correct it in one of my pieces. Yeah. Like, if someone's like, excuse me, sir, that fact is incorrect. I'm like, my bad. I'll go email my editor. And we get penalized for small mistakes. The right wing gets rewarded and coddled for egregious lying. Ben Shapiro had this sweetheart profile in the New York Times where they called him the cool kid's philosopher. This was after all of his anti-LGBT stuff, anti-woman stuff, anti-Palestinian stuff, anti-Muslim stuff. Because he was a right-wing YouTuber who was gaining currency within new media, right? He's a cool kid's philosopher. You have an amazing podcast. You have a YouTube channel with 1 billion views. The vice president herself said, I'm going to talk to Brian. I'm a busy woman, but I'm going to talk to Brian. And yet people like you within our spaces are not afforded that type of leverage and profile, if indeed there is a both sides shtick. So there is no both sides, in my opinion, right?
What it is, in effect, is just a curve. And these people on the right are graded on such a curve. And so they're given all of this latitude, like Ben Shapiro, the cool kids. Imagine, it just wouldn't happen that if you had said even a modicum of what this guy had said, but you were on the left, you'd imagine
it'd be over, man. It'd be over.
Yeah. As it should be, by the way.
And so the question I have is, look, the Democrats themselves, historically, the party, has unfortunately played to this curve instead of calling it out.
Yep.
And the Democratic Party, and we've talked about this on this podcast, has unfortunately forgotten its base, oftentimes courting this mythical unicorn Rust Belt voter who drinks real coffee in a diner that apparently me and Danielle can't access because it lives in Narnia, right? And instead, Danielle's like, I'm your base. I'm a black woman. I'm literally saving democracy. Look at Letitia James, Fannie Willis. They're like, whatever, darky, keep quiet. Just vote for us anyway. And they're like, Brian is like, hey, I'm a white progressive. I actually care about these values. Like, whatever, you hipster who drinks oat milk, just go away. And so do you think there's a moment here where the Democratic Party is realizing, we got to meet our base where they are?
I think we're in that moment. Look at Joe Biden's approval rating before this summer, before all of the progressive accomplishments that were earned by this majority happened. Before student loan debt was forgiven for 43 million borrowers, before the Inflation Reduction Act gave the biggest climate investment in world history, finally allowed the government to negotiate lower drug prices, finally made the rich pay their fair share to a certain degree in terms of the 15% corporate minimum tax for businesses, in terms of beefing up IRS enforcement for wealthy tax cheats. Those are all unapologetic progressive agenda items. And so before, as we were coming into this summer, I even I remember doing podcasts last winter where I was like, look, if we're going to go into midterms next year and all we have to show for ourselves is a bipartisan infrastructure package, a roads bill, that ain't it. Like watered down, well, let's make both sides happy. That ain't it. And Joe Biden's approval rating was reflective of that. And then we had all of these progressive accomplishments happen this summer. Like I said, from student loan debt, from finally climate money, from some tax fairness, healthcare. And all of a sudden his approval rating is up like between 5 and 10 points in every single
huge.
poll.
He's at 47% now.
Yeah. So I think that this is a living, breathing testament to exactly that if you're gonna do this half-assedly, people are gonna respond half-assedly. And if you're on the other hand, if you're gonna go all in and actually live the values that you claim to have when you're in your campaigns, then I think that people are going to respond that way too. And so I think that we're seeing that right now.
One of the things that I think, you have demonstrated and Waj and I do as well is trying to meet people where they actually are. right? And that is the thing that I believe that Democrats do a terrible job at. And what I trash them for all the time is that they still live, I think until recently, until Joe Biden uttered the word abortion, until he uttered the word semi-fascist, which he could have dropped the semi, right? And it's actually calling out the villain and naming who they are, that they had been believing in this historical vision of American politics, right? Where we have to refer to our colleague from across the aisle, where we have to walk in this balanced and measured way, holding themselves to account in ways that their opposition isn't. But when I say meeting people where they are, meaning that yes, I think that it's important to sit down with the ABCs and the MSNBCs of the world, absolutely. But I am thrilled at the fact that the vice president, who again is much younger than the president of the United States, recognizes that, yeah, billion views on Brian Tyler show, I'm going to go over there, right? As opposed to like, it isn't just about like, oh, let me go where the eyeballs are. It's understanding your demographic, understanding your base and what they need and how they're moving and giving them what they need where they are. Waj and I are both writers, right? Like I write for different outlets, except guess what? I know that a large portion of the population doesn't fucking read. So what else do? I do short form videos on TikTok, right? For people who got 60 seconds worth of time. So let me give you that news clip that is going to allow you to be in the know for today, right? And the same thing going over and being like, okay, well, some people love to listen to 30-minute podcasts, right? So we're going to give them that information. So you have to be able to figure out, here's the information. How am I going to disseminate it? So my question for you, Brian, is like, what do you think that it will take for this party to adapt in the way that, as Waj said at the top, the Republicans have adapted? They know where their people are and they know what they want to hear.
You know, I think that we're in the midst of that right now, and I think people are recognizing it. I think that you see these up and coming Democrats like the AOCs and even the not so up and coming Democrats like Bernie, who've harnessed the power of non-traditional media and social media so much more effectively than everyone else. And I think that people are recognizing the power in not only getting their message out, but also getting coverage on mainstream outlets. And so you can have people who really do focus on non-traditional, like John Fetterman, for example, and look at how much that lends itself to his coverage when he is on CNN, when people are talking about him on MSNBC, on other on even right-wing outlets. That's all driven by social. Also fundraising. There's no way that these people aren't seeing now that by virtue of going all in on small dollar fundraising and not focusing on PACs, but on focusing on people and getting people to actually believe in your campaign, that they're not seeing the power that has. And that's all leveraged by using social. So I think people are recognizing it now. I know the White House absolutely sees it. I don't know how much you can see behind the scenes. I mean, I am able to see, just by virtue of like this being my community and me having friends in this community, that there are people that are in constant contact with the White House. The White House has been really receptive, to their credit, in doing what the Trump White House, to its credit, did with creators, which is bringing them into the fold. I like you mentioned, I was able to do that interview with Kamala Harris. That was solely due to the fact that their office recognized the importance of non-traditional media. I went to the White House and interviewed President Biden. That was because they recognized the importance of non-traditional media. And so I think that they are getting it. And I think one other thing is, it's just a generational thing. And I think that the right, which is weird because the right speaks to people who are much, much older, but the right has been able to recruit candidates who are younger. And I think that until there's that parity where people who just inherently understand it, as opposed to trying to teach a septuagenarian or an octogenarian how to use Twitter or emails or TikTok, if we can just continue to recruit young people who inherently know how to use these platforms, it's going to be a hell of a lot easier. But we do skew older. I mean, like we do have older representatives because they're good legislators, and that's what's important for Democrats. as opposed to Republicans who need to be communicators. And the older you get, inherently, it's going to be more difficult. But they have a communication strategy, which is just to lie and bullshit people. But Democrats want to govern because they believe in government. They don't think that the point of government is to break it. So there's an inherent divide in terms of like what both parties want to do. But I think what we need is to find, is to make sure that there is that changing of the guard, and that the older folks within the Democratic Party, the older legislators, are making room for young people who, A, yes, do believe in legislating, but B, know how to communicate and know how to leverage these social media platforms and know how to reach people where they are.